Hello everyone, straight from Brazil to the world, you are on the Boosted Man channel. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos.
Have you ever felt that in the beginning everything seemed a little too perfect? As if she appeared exactly the way you dreamed, ready to fill every void, ready to be the answer to all your needs. Yet something inside you, maybe very subtle, already suspected. No one reveals themselves so fully, so quickly without hiding something. The beginning of a relationship is rarely a pure reflection of truth. It is a stage, a mirror. And it's in this reflection that many men get lost, confusing projection with reality. What seems like sweetness may just be a test. What seems like desire may just be camouflage. What seems like love may only be your own longing reflected back at you. Carl Jung said that every human encounter begins with projection. You don't see the person, you see your own shadow or your own ideal projected onto them, and that's exactly where the game begins. She notices what you want to see and offers a molded version of that desire. Without realizing it, you begin to believe you've found the perfect woman, when in truth, you've only found your own image reflected in another body. The problem isn't that she lies with words. The lie is subtler, more dangerous. It's in the gestures of controlled sweetness, in the answers that come too quickly, in the gaze that promises more than it intends to give. It's not about explicit malice, but about an unconscious dance many women have learned since early on. Show a glimpse of paradise and watch how you react to the scent of forbidden fruit. And this is where so many men fall. You give yourself too soon, you believe too soon, you cling too soon. The mistake isn't in the feeling you offer, but in the way you hand over your essence without filter, as if that first moment were already eternity. While you're opening yourself completely, she's still measuring, observing, testing. Joe Dispenza talks about how the mind creates emotional addictions, and in the beginning, this manufactured sweetness becomes exactly that, an addiction. You start chasing the same intensity, the same attention, the same energy she showed in those first encounters. But what you're chasing isn't real. It's just the illusion planted as a seed to keep you orbiting around her. Awakening begins when you realize that this initial enchantment isn't proof of authenticity, but a staged scenario. That the sweet signals may be more a thermometer of your behavior than a genuine expression of hers. That the smiles, the compliments, the subtle promises are often tools of observation, not of true giving. You need to see beyond the reflection, to recognize when you're facing a woman, and when you're only facing your own projected longing. Because as long as you believe that the initial image is real, you'll stay trapped in a cycle of frustration, chasing a version of her that never truly existed. And this is the essence of the hidden lie that so many women tell at the beginning. Not a spoken lie, but an acted one. A subtle theater where you believe you're witnessing truth, when in reality, you're only watching the role that best seduces your vulnerability, the mirror of idealization. In the beginning, you're not meeting a woman, you're meeting a reflection of what you want to see, of what you want to believe, of what you've projected in your mind through years of longing, frustration, and silent hope. She doesn't appear as herself, but as the version molded by your gaze. It's as if she becomes an emotional mirror, reflecting back your hunger for love, your thirst for attention, your need for validation. This process is invisible and devastating. Because at first you believe she is the perfect woman. She laughs at your jokes, agrees with your opinions, shows interest in what you like. But what's actually happening is that she's aligning her gestures with what keeps you hooked. Like an emotional radar, she perceives your weak spots, identifies what you crave most, and reflects exactly that signal back to you. The illusion forms quickly. You feel like you've found someone rare, someone who finally understands your soul. But in reality, you've only found the reflection of your own emptiness. And when that reflection shatters, the impact is brutal. You don't just feel like you've lost a woman, you feel like you've lost yourself. Psychology calls this projective idealization. Jung said that when we fail to recognize our own voids, we project onto others the mission of filling them. That's exactly what happens here. You're not seeing who she truly is, but who you desperately want her to be. And while you project, she responds with the perfect image that keeps your hope alive. But the reflection has an expiration date. At some point, the mirror breaks, and what emerges behind it may be completely different from what you imagined. Sweetness turns to coldness. Interest turns to distance. The gaze turns to calculation. And that's when you ask yourself, what happened to the woman I met at the beginning? The hard truth, she never existed. There was only the reflection you built yourself. The dynamic is clear. At first, you're not being loved. You're being observed. Your reactions are being measured. Your vulnerability is being tested. If you give in too fast, if you open up too soon, if you show dependency, she realizes she has power over you. And the reflection intensifies only to keep you trapped. It's a silent game. The more you believe in the perfect image, the further away you are from the truth. The greater danger is becoming dependent on that idealization, like a man who falls in love with his own dream. He doesn't want to wake up, because waking up means facing the reality. The woman in front of him doesn't match the icon he created in his mind. And while you fight to keep the illusion alive, she gains time, space, and power. This is where many men get lost. They believe they need to fight to bring back that initial version, as if they could win back the lost reflection. But there's nothing to win back, because that version was never real. What existed was a mirror reflecting your emptiness so convincingly that it felt like true love. The way out is to break the mirror, to realize that when someone seems too perfect too soon, they're not showing authenticity, but strategy. To recognize that, in the beginning, every relationship is an exchange of masks, and it's up to you not to confuse reflection with essence. When you learn to see beyond the reflection, something changes. You're no longer impressed by the initial perfection because you understand it's just the stage. You observe more, give less, keep your structure intact. And in that state, the power of idealization fades away. The mirror only works as long as you believe in it. Once you see that the initial perfection is nothing more than the shadow of your own neediness, the hidden lie starts to lose its grip, and only then do you finally move closer to the truth. The game of temporary sweetness. In the beginning, her tenderness feels infinite. The sweet looks, the constant messages, the almost exaggerated attention. You feel like you're being prioritized, as if she has reserved a special place just for you. But what few men realize is that this initial sweetness isn't a permanent portrait. It's an experiment, a carefully crafted testing ground designed to observe how you react. The common mistake is believing that this intensity means genuine devotion. But in reality, many women know, even unconsciously, that small gestures of affection act as emotional triggers. They create contrast, showing more warmth at the start precisely to measure how hungry you are for it. And the more you feed on that temporary affection, the more vulnerable you become once it starts to fade. That's when you lose yourself. The hug that once felt spontaneous becomes rare. The late-night texts stop arriving. The attention turns into silence. But by then, the addiction has already been created. Your mind, as neuroscience explains, has already associated that early affection with the feeling of reward. It's like the dopamine hit in a gambler's brain when the machine flashes lights and sounds, a powerful stimulus that later disappears, leaving behind only the craving for more. And in that emptiness, you start begging. Not always with words, but with actions, responding too quickly, reaching out without reason, trying to repeat what worked in the beginning so she'll give you what she once gave. But the game is already underway. She no longer needs to maintain that sweetness. She's already gotten what mattered most, testing the intensity and seeing how far you'd go not to lose her. This pattern repeats like an invisible script. First, she pulls you in with warmth and attention, then she withdraws. And you, conditioned by that beginning, start chasing. It's as if she lit a flame just to see if you'd burn yourself. And most men burn without ever realizing it. It's not always pure malice. Often, it's social instinct. Women learn from early on that offering selective tenderness is a way of evaluating who's in front of them. The problem is when you confuse a test with a promise, when you believe that early affection is the foundation of the relationship, when in reality it was only the experimental phase. Psychology calls this intermittent reinforcement. The same mechanism that addicts, gamblers, and social media users. You don't get the reward all the time, only in calculated doses, and that makes you cling harder because you never know when the next one will come. This way, you become a prisoner of an affection that was never constant, only strategic. Understand this. It's not about the affection she gives, but about your reaction to it. If you lose yourself, she learns she controls your perception of value. If you hold your ground, the game loses its strength. The secret isn't in asking for more. It's in realizing that less already reveals the truth. Men who understand this don't panic when the sweetness disappears. They recognize the beginning for what it was. A setup, not a promise. They don't fall into the trap of chasing the echo of something that was never authentic. They know that if the sweetness was temporary, the connection was never real. The real turning point comes when you stop seeking the return of that early phase. When you understand that your role isn't to rescue the enchantment, but to see that it was only a test. In that moment, the dependency dissolves, and you regain the emotional control you thought was lost. Because the game of temporary sweetness only has power over the man who believes it's eternal. When you wake up, you realize the true power was never in the affection she gave, but in your ability not to become enslaved by it. The camouflage of desire. In the beginning, she may appear more interested than she truly is, not because she's a conscious manipulator, but because feminine instinct and social conditioning have long taught one lesson: project intensity to protect yourself in the game of selection. It's a mask of desire, a smokescreen that hides the uncertainty she still carries within. You notice the signals, the quick touches, the exaggerated curiosity, the way she seems fascinated by everything you say. But often that intensity is only a performance not meant for you, but for herself. Because while she camouflages, she buys time to assess whether you are truly the kind of man worthy of her full surrender. The problem begins when you take that performance as absolute proof. You believe her desire is genuine, and so you accelerate. You open up too much, too soon. You give yourself away before she's even decided if she's truly there. And without realizing it, you build expectations on something that never existed beyond the surface. The fall doesn't come from rejection, but from the gap between the warmth she showed at first and the coldness that follows. That contrast isn't coincidence, it's structure. The camouflage is meant to create an initial impact, to capture your attention, to place you in the role of the pursuer. Once you believe she desires more than she truly does, you begin fighting to keep that supposed desire alive. But there's nothing to keep alive. It was never real. It was only a projection designed to protect her value. Evolutionary psychology explains this mechanism as self-preservation. By displaying strong desire early on, she creates the illusion of shared value. You feel like you've conquered something rare, but in truth, you've simply been drawn into a testing ground. Because while you're giving yourself away, she's quietly measuring whether your value matches the intensity she displayed. It's like a silent interview. She smiles, touches you, compliments you, but inside her questions are alive. Does he have center? Does he lose balance too easily? Does he become dependent on my attention? The camouflage isn't about deception, it's about observation. But in the process, you become the victim of your own rush to believe. The fatal mistake is confusing performance with essence. Genuine desire doesn't need exaggeration. It doesn't rely on theatrical displays. When it's real, it's simpler, steadier, more consistent. But when it's camouflage, it shows up fast, burns bright, and then vanishes like smoke. And that's what traps most men. They spend the entire relationship trying to resurrect that beginning, trying to recreate the intensity they believed was real. But what they're chasing isn't true desire. It's the illusion that served as a mask. Jung said the unconscious creates images to protect the ego. That's exactly what happens here. The camouflage protects not only her, but also you. Because she gives you what you want to see, and you accept seeing it, just to avoid facing the truth. The truth that maybe she was never as interested as you wanted to believe. Freedom begins when you realize that real desire doesn't need to hide behind curtains. It reveals itself through consistency, not impact. If the start was too intense, be skeptical. If the gestures seem too big for such little time, observe carefully. The rush to appear in love is often just the rush to test how easily you lose yourself in the play. When you learn to distinguish real desire from camouflage, the entire game changes. You stop chasing the smoke. You stop craving the initial high. You begin to observe, to wait, to measure. And instead of being the one tested, you become the one who tests. The power shifts because you no longer believe in performance, only in what remains standing once the curtain falls. The camouflage of desire loses its power when you finally understand that early intensity isn't proof of authenticity. It's only the polish that covers doubt. And once you see it clearly, the charm stops being a prison, the invisible test of power. The hidden lie doesn't reveal itself in words. It lives in the silence between gestures. What looks like affection, attention, or desire is often nothing more than a test of resistance. The real exam isn't in what she says, but in how you react. And that's exactly where most men fail. At the beginning, she watches. She observes how quickly you get attached, how fast you give yourself away, how easily you lose your center the moment you receive a little attention. Every message replied to in seconds, every anxious attempt to please, every sign of emotional dependency is noted. It's an invisible test of power, a way to measure whether the man in front of her is solid or easily shaped. When you rush to prove your worth, what you're really proving is your neediness. And the attraction that once seemed to grow begins to fade. Because for many women, desire doesn't come from what's easily conquered. It comes from what resists, from what stays grounded, from what doesn't bow to the first promise of affection. This mechanism is unconscious. It's not malice or manipulation, it's instinct. Psychology calls it a congruence test, the attempt to align your words with your actions. She doesn't just want to hear that you're confident. She wants to see if you stay confident when she makes you doubt. It's not enough to say you're in control. She wants to see if you remain composed when emotion is triggered. The mistake most men make is confusing this process with rejection. They believe that if they don't respond immediately, they'll lose her. But the truth is the opposite. It's when you don't lose yourself that everything changes. Because in that moment, she realizes she doesn't control you, and that paradoxically increases her desire. The invisible test shows up in many forms. Sometimes she distances herself on purpose just to see if you panic. Sometimes she turns cold after being sweet, just to see if you chase her. Sometimes she mentions other men, just to see if you react with insecurity. These moments aren't random. They're emotional experiments meant to reveal who you really are when pressure rises. And here's the secret. It's not what you say, but what you transmit in silence that determines the outcome. If you stay calm, stick to your routine, and hold your ground without begging for attention, the dynamic shifts. Because suddenly, the test loses meaning. She sees that she can't manipulate your balance, and that's exactly what draws her in. Jung once said, "What you do not confront in yourself will return as fate." If you don't face your own neediness, the invisible test will expose it, because every hidden insecurity will surface when she presses the right trigger. And conversely, every ounce of inner strength becomes visible when you refuse to lose your center. That's why so many men confuse attraction with effort. They think they have to give more, prove more, chase more. But real power doesn't come from giving more. It comes from losing less of yourself in the process. That self-control is what turns the test of power into a revelation of desire. When you understand this, the entire game reverses. You no longer fear mixed signals because you know they're only emotional experiments. You don't chase after silence because you recognize it as part of the script. You don't get lost in comparisons because you understand they aren't about other men. They're about your reaction. And in that state, something profound happens. The hidden lie loses its strength. Because if the lie was fueled by your quick attachment, it collapses when you stay grounded. The desire that once seemed fragile solidifies, precisely because you didn't fall for the test. In the end, the invisible test of power was never about her. It was always about you.